Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here on Times Now. This is Times Now Live and I am Hina Gambhir. Viewers, a month after the tragic Air India plane crash in Ahmedabad that claimed the lives of 260 people, a preliminary probe report has been released by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. Now, this is the first official account of what went wrong with the AI-71 flight seconds after takeoff from the Ahmedabad airport. As per the preliminary report, fuel cutoff switches of both engines transitioned from run to cutoff position, as per the report, one after another within a gap of 1 second. So we have got to know what really happened, what went wrong. But whose fault was it? Who should be held responsible? On that aspect, this report is absolutely silent. And this particular information that we have got about the fuel engine switches has led to, many more questions being asked today. And this particular aspect of how, the fuels, fuel cutoff switches of both engines transition from run to cutoff position one after the other within a gap of 1 second. This particular aspect has led to snapping of fuel supply to both engines. This is what the report has mentioned, causing them to lose power. However, the report does not mention what caused the fuel switches to move, to transition from one mode to the other. Was it due to human action, a mechanical failure, or some kind of malfunction, electronic malfunction maybe, systemic issue? We don't know. Now, a critical question that remains unanswered and is the focus of the ongoing investigation is this. Now, preliminary report, viewers, also contains a paraphrased account of the communication that took place inside the cockpit pertaining to the fuel cutoff. According to the AAIB report, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? He was perhaps referring to the fuel switch, because there are two modes there, run and cut off. The other pilot responded that he did not do so. And after the fuel supply was cut off, the pilots scrambled to save the aircraft. Within 10 to 14 seconds of the fuel supply cutoff, they moved both fuel switches back to the run position. Both engines began automatic restart sequences, with engine 1 showing signs of recovery and engine 2 attempting to relight. However, recovery could not be achieved due to insufficient time as well as altitude. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we have got to know what really led to this particular crash. But why did that happen? Who should be held responsible? All of those details have not really emerged. In fact, all other details that are mentioned in this report have led to more and more questions that people are asking today. And it has added to the mystery that really continues around this particular plane crash. And to help us understand a little better about the findings of this particular report, I'm joined by Terry Tozer, who is a former airline pilot and author. Terry Tozer, appreciate you joining us here on Times Now. Thank you very much for speaking with us. Firstly, I want to ask you, when you look at this preliminary report, what are your initial 2-3 takeaways?
Well, I think you've covered it very thoroughly already. I mean, my initial reaction was one of shock. I couldn't think, and I still haven't really had a good explanation as to why the fuel switches should move. They are, in theory, locked until they are lifted out of their locking mechanism. And so it does require human input to select them from run to cutoff. Why that should happen then becomes the big mystery and a subject of much conjecture.
You're saying it requires human input? And if we look at the words that have been used here by the investigators are very interesting. Now, the word that has been used is that it transitioned from run to cutoff. So is there also an indication perhaps there could be some other reason behind this movement of this particular switch? Can that happen with a Dreamliner? I mean, I'm just asking because simultaneously in this report, the investigators have made a reference to an advisory by US FAA of 2018, the lock system.
Yes, indeed they have. And unfortunately, the one thing that we don't know is whether or not this particular aircraft had the lock mechanisms disabled or whether they were functioning. Even if the lock mechanism was disabled, it's hard to see how they would move without being touched. I suppose that what we're dealing with now is a report that has dealt with the facts as they know it at the moment. The further, more detailed report, which will take probably a year to come out, will go into all the whys this happened. At the moment, we're only looking at the what. And they won't apportion blame. A good accident report simply produces facts. And if they find that one of the pilots moved the switches themselves, then whether or not they can give us an idea of why that would happen, we can't possibly say at this point.
But, at the same time, as per the preliminary report, there is an excerpt of the conversation between the pilot moments before the crash that has been paraphrased as well. And it says that, one of them is asking, why did he cut off the fuel? And the other one responded saying he did not. What do you make of this? Because here it is another important piece of information that we have to perhaps analyze what was going on inside the cockpit during those final seconds.
Yes, indeed. And I'm sure that's why they put that into the report, so that the public will have some idea of what they know already. I suspect that they will have heard a lot more than just those phrases. The cockpit voice recorder also records all the general sound on the flight deck, as well as the internal intercom communications. And it may be that the accident investigators will be able to tell whether they can hear the sound of switches being moved. Because if the pilot who says he did not is truthful and he did not, then they have moved without any human input. And that, as far as I can see, is close to impossible. I've not seen any explanation yet how that might happen.
So you're saying that there cannot be a design flaw here, there cannot be a technical failure here, completely ruled out?
I wouldn't rule anything out, and I'm sure the accident investigators have not ruled anything out either. Their normal routine would be to consider absolutely any possibility. And obviously they will be looking for hard evidence that indicates one way or the other. What is really puzzling about this is that, pilots are like any other human being. They will make mistakes, but systems are designed to catch those mistakes and prevent them from coming into some kind of catastrophic result like this one. But, normally there are a sequence of events, more than one thing that happens that combines to generate a serious accident. And there doesn't appear to be anything else. This seems to be the single cause. And it is a considerable puzzle. And until some of the Boeing engineers can come up with an answer that explains how the switches could move on their own, I'm inclined to assume that somebody did it. Okay,
but given the history of Boeing, given how the situation was with 737 MAX as well in the past in 2018 and 19, the two crashes that took place, Lion Air, Ethiopian Airlines, at that time also this narrative was that perhaps it was a pilot error. I mean, you don't have pilots alive to defend themselves. Do you think it's very easy to just put the onus on the pilots because they are not there defending themselves? They are not there telling us what really went wrong. And eventually we know what came out of the investigation in both the cases, how Boeing was in fact forced to in a way acknowledge that there was some kind of a flaw, a mechanical flaw did exist with its ADAS system. So When AAIB in its prelim report says there are no recommendations for either Boeing or the engine maker General Electric here, don't you think it's also jumping the gun in a way, giving them a clean chit? Perhaps that was not needed in this report?
Well, you cover a lot there, and of course you are quite right to question all these things. And there is no doubt that the 737 MAX crashes were a result of an absolutely dreadful scandal, and Boeing's reputation was quite rightly badly damaged because the way that was allowed to happen was an absolute disgrace. I'm not sure that we can really draw direct parallels with that. I mean, I am extremely sympathetic to the pilots. Obviously, I identify with their position, and it will be awful for their families, the very fact that they can't speak for themselves and will be the subject of much conjecture. But if we look at the purely clinical issues involved here, either somebody moved the switch to cutoff, it moved itself, and the latter explanation is one, well, we don't have an answer for that.
You're a pilot yourself. As a pilot, what you're saying, can something like that really happen? What are the circumstances if you are faced with a situation like it was for these two pilots?
Well, obviously, somebody reacted in the correct way by moving the switches back to run. And the operation of these fuel cutoff switches does form part of the non-normal emergency checklist that Boeing publish and Air India use. And it says that if you had an engine failure, you would select the, or one of the actions you might follow is to select these switches to off and then back to run. And that will initiate the relight, as you already said, and that worked. So it would appear from this and other aspects that the actual aeroplane itself did exactly what it was designed to do.
But within 1 second, how is it possible that both the switches can actually be moved from one mode to the other, from run to cutoff? Can that happen? Because as per the preliminary report, it happened within 1 second. I mean, I was also reading about these switches, how they really operate. You have to put a little bit of pressure to pull it up and then move it up or down to change, to move from one mode to the other. How can that just happen in 1 second? That is why I'm asking you again and again. How can we rule out some kind of a mechanical or a technical failure here?
I don't think you can rule anything out. And I'm sure the investigators will not rule anything out. Somebody moved the switch deliberately, or there is an inexplicable technical malfunction that nobody yet has been able to provide an answer for. Now, whether that will be forthcoming in the near future or whether we will have to wait for almost another year, I don't know. I mean, it will be very unfortunate for the families of everyone involved if we do, but I think that could well be the case.
But I want to again ask you, because you are an expert, you know what happens inside a cockpit, how the things really are. So when you hear this line, the fuel, both engine fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff position one after the other with a time gap of just 1 second. Does it not sound a bit unusual to you as a pilot? Can it actually happen? I mean, there are two pilots here inside the cockpit. And for this thing to happen, to change the mode of these two switches, it's not even one switch that we're talking about, to change both of them, you require effort. Can it happen actually in 1 second?
Well, I mean, if you wish to use them, it's a very quick. You just lift and move, and that's apparently what happened. And it happened one after the other. They didn't go simultaneously. It implies that somebody did that. Now, whether they did it by mistake or from a deliberate decision, obviously I can't possibly say. I can't think of any reason why either pilot would have their hands anywhere near those switches at that point in flight. We know that the first officer was the handling pilot. He was flying the aeroplane. He would have been focused on the correct process that he normally follows in taking off and achieving a proper climb. And the captain would have been focused on monitoring what the handling pilot was doing. Now, obviously, there is no logical reason why anybody would move or go anywhere near those switches unless they had some other motive. And, you know, it would be very unfair to try and attribute sinister motives to anybody at this stage.
Some pilot unions and experts and observers here have raised red flags about investigation possibly leaning towards pilot error too early. Based on the information in the preliminary report, do you see any evidence of bias or premature conclusions in a way? For example, some are saying that, you know, perhaps there is, in terms of the detail or the information that has been shared, even that's very selective. For example, from the cockpit voice recorder, why only just this excerpt of the conversation has been shared? So do you see there is some kind of a bias here?
On the face of it, no. I mean, obviously, any accident report will have implications for people that they may not wish to hear. I think on the face of it, the investigators have been very careful. The amount of conversation that they publish is strictly limited to these two switches. Now, they will have heard an awful lot more than we are privy to at the moment. We don't know what their theories are. They will be discussing amongst themselves what may or may not be the cause of this. And you know, what they're doing at the moment is simply publishing the facts. And of course, because everything like this produces a whole load of unanswered questions, we all want to know. And quite simply, they won't have come to a proper conclusion, and it's not responsible for them to publish conjecture.
In your opinion, on the basis of preliminary findings, were there any problems with the plane other than this aspect?
Not that I can see. There was a defect on the previous flight that was entered in the technical log. That was dealt with by the engineers before this crew took the aircraft over. The captain will have examined the technical log and satisfied himself that the aircraft was fit for service. He would then be required to sign for it and leave behind the paperwork that says that he has checked it and that it's okay. So there's nothing on the face of it from what we've learned so far to indicate that there was anything wrong with the aircraft apart from this mystery.
Coming back to Boeing here, no action has been recommended against Boeing at this stage. Do you believe that's a fair and justified decision?
Well, I think so. If the investigators are satisfied that the sole cause of this was the fuel cutoff selection, it does explain why we didn't hear anything quite early on about inspections or groundings of any other 787. We were wondering whether there would be some kind of repercussions, but this is so bizarre that I think the chances of it being, found to happen in any other 787 are vanishingly small.
Okay. And what is it that you will now like to say, a few things that you feel should have been included in this report that perhaps have not been included? Because eventually, after seeing this 15-page report, there are more questions that come to mind than really answers. We were looking for answers as to what really led to this crash.
Well, I mean, what we know is we have got the answer of what led to the crash in the sense that the engines were shut down and were unable to recover in time. We know the what, we don't know the why. The questions that I would like to know now is whether or not these fuel cutoff switches were fully protected in the way that they were originally designed to do, or whether or not there was a fault with the protection. It isn't a complete explanation, but it would help. And I think we need to have any other way that the recording systems, like the flight data recorder, could actually record a fuel cutoff selection if the switch didn't move at all, some electronic problem. My understanding at the moment is that that's not possible, but obviously I don't think they'll rule out anything at this point.
Well, absolutely. At this stage, nothing can be really ruled out. But thank you very much, Mr. Terry Tozer. Appreciate you speaking with us here on Times Now and sharing with us your perspective. With this, we will slip into a very, very short break. We'll be back with more. Stay with us.